The 1980s birthed dreams of neon futures and dark apocalypses, yet many of its boldest sci-fi visions were dismissed, mocked, or left to rot in bargain bins. But here's the twist. Time has proven critics wrong. What once seemed clumsy or strange now feels prophetic. Which forgotten gems secretly reshaped the genre? Tonight, we rediscover 15 misjudged masterpieces. Life Force, 1985. When Life Force premiered, critics branded it a chaotic mess, a bizarre mix of space vampires, horror shock, and cosmic apocalypse. Audiences expecting a sleek sci-fi adventure recoiled at its surreal nudity, gore, and dreamlike logic. It bombed at the box office, dismissed as exploitation disguised as spectacle. But beneath the ridicule lies something daring. Directed by Tobe Hooper, hot off Poltergeist, the film adapted Colin Wilson's novel The Space Vampires. With funding from Cannon Films, known for their risky gambles, Hooper delivered a hallucinatory mix of British stiff upper-lip military precision and feverish nightmare imagery. Behind the scenes, the production struggled with budget overruns and confused marketing. Was it horror, sci-fi, erotica? No studio could decide. Yet its blend of gothic terror and cosmic dread anticipated the body horror surrealism that would later define cult favorites like Event Horizon. Today, Life Force is celebrated by genre fans for its operatic weirdness and staggering ambition. Its haunting score, practical effects, and unapologetic madness have aged into something resembling visionary art. Once considered a disaster, it now glows as a rare example of 1980s sci-fi daring to be truly strange. It reminds us that sometimes failure is just brilliance arriving too soon. Enemy Mine, 1985. Upon release, Enemy Mine was a financial black hole. Critics scoffed at its sentimentality, and audiences stayed away, leaving its interstellar piece parable stranded. Many dismissed it as a misguided buddy movie in space. But peel back the box office shame and you uncover a deeply human fable. Directed by Wolfgang Petersen, fresh from Das Boot, the film tells of two enemies, a human pilot and a reptilian alien, stranded on a hostile planet. Forced to cooperate, they move from hatred to kinship, even raising a child together. The troubled shoot nearly killed the project. Original director Richard Loncraine was fired mid-production, and Petersen reshot nearly everything, ballooning the budget. Studios panicked, critics rolled their eyes, and the film limped into obscurity. Yet today, Enemy Mine resonates in ways critics never foresaw. Its themes of tolerance, empathy, and shared survival echo louder in a fractured modern world. Dennis Quaid's raw vulnerability and Louis Gossett Jr.'s transformative alien performance have gained long-delayed recognition. Once derided as saccharine, it now feels quietly radical. Proof that science fiction isn't just lasers and war, but also reconciliation and hope. The Hidden, 1987. In the late 80s, The Hidden was a cult whisper but hardly a mainstream hit. Critics called it derivative, a mashup of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Terminator, too violent and too shallow to matter. But fans who stayed in their seats witnessed something electric. Jack Shoulder's film fused buddy cop action with alien parasite horror, creating a wild, unpredictable hybrid. FBI agent Kyle MacLachlan, playing with eerie calm, partners with a hard-edged detective as they chase an alien that leaps from body to body, leaving a trail of chaos. Behind the camera, the film was shot quickly and cheaply, with Shoulder leaning into guerrilla-style intensity. The studio, unsure how to market it, buried it. But audiences who found it on VHS were stunned by its pace, its violent inventiveness, and its sly humor. Over time, The Hidden has been reclaimed as a quintessential 80s cult film, its DNA evident in later works like Men in Black and Fallen. What critics once dismissed as pulp has aged into a time capsule of wild, fearless genre filmmaking. It leaves us asking, why chase prestige when raw energy can be eternal? Altered States, 1980. When Ken Russell's Altered States hit theaters, it baffled critics and unnerved audiences. Some called it brilliant, others incomprehensible. The New York Times dubbed it sensational nonsense. Yet beneath the sneers, it was one of the boldest studio experiments of its decade. Based on Paddy Chayefsky's novel, the film follows a scientist, William Hurt in his debut role, who experiments with sensory deprivation and hallucinogens, regressing to a primal state. The film was plagued by battles. Chayefsky disowned it after clashing with Russell, whose flamboyant style amplified the psychedelic visions. The production nearly collapsed under ego wars. Audiences, expecting coherent science, recoiled from Russell's surreal descent into caveman transformations and cosmic dreamscapes. But the visuals, pulsing, grotesque, luminous, were decades ahead of their time. Today, Altered States feels prophetic, prefiguring debates about psychedelics, altered consciousness, and humanity's fragile grip on identity. What once seemed lunatic excess now reads as visionary daring. Dismissed in 1980, it now stands as proof that true science fiction doesn't predict technology. It confronts the storm inside the human mind. Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, 1983. When Space Hunter arrived in 1983, it was immediately branded a gimmick. Released in 3D during the brief early 80s craze, critics sneered that it was little more than a cash grab designed to lure in Star Wars fans desperate for another intergalactic thrill. The reviews were merciless, painting it as shallow, derivative pulp. Audiences mostly agreed, and the film barely survived its theatrical run. Yet under the surface, Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone is far stranger and far more ambitious than its reputation suggests. Directed by Lamont Johnson and starring Peter Strauss alongside a young Molly Ringwald, the film plays like a fever dream fusion of Mad Max, Star Wars, and pulp comic serials. Its landscapes are blasted wastelands, its villains grotesque warlords, its survivors scavengers clinging to life. Behind the scenes, production was troubled. Cost ballooned as Columbia Pictures tried to capitalize on the 3D wave, rushing the release to beat Return of the Jedi. That move doomed it, as no film could compete with George Lucas's juggernaut. Critics laughed at its melodrama, while audiences overlooked its wild mix of genre tropes. But time has been unexpectedly kind. Fans now celebrate its handmade sets, bizarre practical effects, and raw comic book energy. Molly Ringwald's scrappy survivor character, mocked at the time, is now appreciated as a rare proto-female action lead. Messy, mouthy, and unpolished, unlike the idealized heroines of other films. Today, Space Hunter plays like a lost pulp epic, filled with imagination that far exceeds its budget. Once dismissed as a gimmick, it's now embraced as a cult relic of the era, a messy but thrilling reminder of a decade that dared to dream big and fail even bigger. It shows us that sometimes failure is just another word for fearless invention. The Last Starfighter, 1984. When The Last Starfighter premiered, critics rolled their eyes. The story, about a teenager recruited by aliens after beating an arcade game, was dismissed as lightweight fluff, a Star Wars imitation without depth or originality. Box office returns were modest, and most assumed it would vanish into the VHS bin. But here's the twist. The Last Starfighter quietly rewrote the rules of filmmaking. It was among the very first movies to use computer-generated imagery for large-scale special effects. The spaceships and cosmic battles, though primitive by today's standards, were groundbreaking in 1984, paving the way for the digital revolution that would dominate cinema decades later. Behind the scenes, production was rushed, and the studio's marketing failed to sell the film's unique mix of teen wish fulfillment and pioneering technology. Critics didn't yet understand the importance of digital effects, so they mocked what looked like crude video game graphics. Yet younger audiences saw something else: the dream of being chosen, plucked from obscurity and thrust into a cosmic battle. Over the years, nostalgia gave the film new life. Fans who grew up with its message, that greatness can be found in the most unlikely of people, began championing it. Filmmakers like Ernest Cline, author of Ready Player One, cited it as a massive influence. What once seemed corny now feels prophetic, anticipating our gaming culture, digital landscapes, and the idea that simulated worlds could shape real destinies. The Last Starfighter aged far better than critics claimed, transforming from a forgotten Star Wars clone into a cultural blueprint for gamer heroes everywhere. It reminds us that technology mocked as crude today can be the seed of tomorrow's revolutions. Trancers, 1984. Released by the scrappy B-movie powerhouse Empire Pictures, Trancers was dismissed at first as yet another low-budget sci-fi curiosity. Critics called it a Terminator knockoff, an exploitation cash-in with too small a budget to matter. Most people missed it entirely, relegating it to the dusty corner of video store shelves. But the film had something critics overlooked: style, atmosphere, and a strange kind of poetry. Directed by Charles Band, it followed a hard-boiled cop from the future, Jack Death, played with gravelly charisma by Tim Thomerson, who chases criminal trancers back into 1980s Los Angeles. Mixing film noir voiceover, rain-slick streets, and time travel mechanics, Trancers felt both retro and futuristic, a strange hybrid that anticipated later cult cyberpunk. Behind the scenes, Band and his team worked miracles with limited resources. They leaned on moody lighting, clever dialogue, and street-level shooting in Los Angeles to create an otherworldly atmosphere without expensive effects. Helen Hunt, in one of her earliest roles, added warmth and humanity to the gritty detective tale. Audiences who stumbled upon it on VHS began spreading the word. Soon, Trancers became a cult favorite, spawning multiple sequels and cementing Jack Death as a cult anti-hero. What critics once called cheap exploitation became recognized as a milestone of low-budget creativity, proof that imagination can outpace money. Today, Trancers sits proudly in the pantheon of scrappy 80s sci-fi that endured, not because of critical acclaim, but because it spoke directly to fans hungry for grit, mood, and attitude. It shows that sometimes the smallest movies leave the biggest shadows. Starman, 1984. When John Carpenter's Starman debuted, critics were puzzled. Here was the man behind Halloween and The Thing, a master of terror, suddenly offering up a tender, sentimental road movie about love, loss, and extraterrestrial wonder. Many dismissed it as overly soft, too slow, too romantic for a decade obsessed with spectacle. At the box office, it underperformed. Coming just 2 years after the brutal failure of The Thing, Carpenter was still in Hollywood's doghouse. Studios wanted blockbusters, not quiet science fiction love stories. Critics compared it unfavorably to E.T., accusing it of riding Spielberg's coattails. But buried inside Starman was a depth of emotion critics didn't yet recognize. Jeff Bridges, in a mesmerizing performance, played an alien who takes the form of a widow's deceased husband. His awkward mimicry of human gestures is both eerie and heartbreaking. Karen Allen, grieving and vulnerable, anchors the film with raw humanity. Behind the scenes, Carpenter fought hard to make the film his way, insisting on quiet, naturalistic pacing instead of flashy action. Bridges' performance earned him an Academy Award nomination, the rare case of an 80s sci-fi star being honored by the Oscars. Over time, Starman has grown in stature, now recognized as one of Carpenter's most profound films. It's not about explosions or monsters, it's about the fragility of human connection, the possibility of love bridging worlds, and the strangeness of seeing ourselves through alien eyes. Dismissed as too sentimental in 1984, Starman now glows with timeless warmth. It reminds us that even in a decade of neon and noise, there was room for quiet wonder. RoboCop 2, 1990. When RoboCop 2 hit theaters, expectations were sky high. Paul Verhoeven's original had stunned audiences with its razor-sharp satire, shocking violence, and haunting humanity. But critics pounced on the sequel, calling it overstuffed, cynical, and mean-spirited. Fans, too, were divided. Some felt it betrayed the spirit of the first film. Yet if you peel back the bad press, you find a daring, chaotic experiment. Directed by Irvin Kershner, The Empire Strikes Back, RoboCop 2 leaned into the grotesque. The story centered on corporate control, urban decay, and a terrifying drug called nuke. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Original writers Frank Miller and Waylon Green delivered a script brimming with satire, but studio executives interfered constantly, demanding more action, more gore, more everything. The production spiraled, costs escalated, and tone was sacrificed. Critics mocked it as incoherent, but in hindsight, RoboCop 2 reflects something eerie: the nightmare of unchecked corporations, police privatization, and addiction crises. Its grotesque villains, especially the tragic drug kingpin Kane-turned-cyborg monster, have aged into uncanny allegories. Fans who rediscovered it on home video began to see it differently. The film may lack the polish of its predecessor, but its audacity and darkness feel strangely prophetic. Miller's fingerprints are unmistakable, ideas later expanded in his comics and graphic novels. Today, RoboCop 2 is celebrated as a flawed gem, a grimy mirror of society's descent into corporate dystopia. What critics dismissed as ugly excess now reads like brutal honesty. It leaves us asking, maybe the problem wasn't the film, it was that the world wasn't ready for its truth. Outland, 1981. When Outland premiered, critics shrugged. They called it High Noon in Space, a derivative Western dressed up with sci-fi window dressing. Audiences, expecting dazzling spectacle after Star Wars, were underwhelmed. The film quietly faded, earning a reputation as a plodding oddity in Sean Connery's career. But director Peter Hyams crafted something far richer than critics noticed. Set on a mining colony orbiting Jupiter's moon Io, Outland told of a marshal investigating mysterious worker deaths linked to dangerous drugs. Connery, weary yet determined, delivered a performance steeped in grit and moral weight. Behind the scenes, Hyams fought to combine noir shadows with futuristic design, creating a world that felt industrial, grimy, and frighteningly real. The marketing doomed it. Audiences wanted space opera, not working-class science fiction. Yet in hindsight, Outland feels startlingly modern. Its depiction of corporate exploitation, labor abuse, and disposable workers resonates powerfully in an age of gig economies and resource battles. Critics once laughed at its low-rent visuals, but today its grounded production design and atmospheric tension shine as strengths. Rediscovered on television and VHS, the film found new respect among sci-fi purists. What was dismissed as derivative now reads as prophetic, blending Western stoicism with corporate dystopia. It reminds us that true courage isn't found in epic battles, but in one man standing alone against corruption in the void of space. Brainstorm, 1983. When Brainstorm arrived, its reputation was overshadowed by tragedy. Natalie Wood, one of Hollywood's brightest stars, died mysteriously during production. The media frenzy around her death eclipsed the film itself, and critics dismissed the final product as muddled and uneven. But beneath the shadow lies one of the most ambitious sci-fi visions of the decade. Directed by Douglas Trumbull, the special effects wizard behind 2001, A Space Odyssey. Brainstorm explored a revolutionary device that records human experiences for others to play back. At its heart, it was about memory, mortality, and the terrifying possibility of experiencing someone else's death. Behind the scenes, the studio nearly shut the project down after Wood's death, but Trumbull fought to finish it, pouring his soul into the effects and imagery. The result was haunting. Sequences of consciousness captured on film, dazzling montages of dreamlike visions, and a finale that dared to depict the afterlife itself. Critics mocked it as incoherent, but in hindsight, its ambition is undeniable. Long before The Matrix or Strange Days, Brainstorm imagined technology that blurred reality and experience. And Wood's final performance, luminous and vulnerable, now gives the film a bittersweet poignancy that no critic in 1983 could have measured. Over time, fans have embraced Brainstorm as a flawed masterpiece, its ambition outweighing its stumbles. It proves that cinema isn't only about perfection, it's about daring to dream beyond the frame. It whispers that sometimes a film's legacy is not its success, but the courage to reach for eternity. Slipstream, 1989. When Slipstream was released, it was written off almost instantly as a failure. With a cast that included Mark Hamill, Bill Paxton, and Ben Kingsley, expectations were high. But the film collapsed at the box office, dismissed as a confusing, slow-paced oddity. Directed by Steven Lisberger, the mind behind Tron, Slipstream was set in a future where Earth's surface is ravaged by powerful winds and humanity survives by navigating the skies. Hamill, playing against type as a ruthless cop, shocked audiences who expected another Luke Skywalker. Bill Paxton's drifter character added reckless charm, but critics were baffled by the film's philosophical musings and unusual tone. Behind the scenes, financing woes and studio interference crippled the production. The film was released in only a handful of theaters, its potential buried before audiences had a chance to discover it. But with time, Slipstream has found redemption. Its aerial photography, real aircraft soaring through rugged landscapes, remains breathtaking. Its themes of freedom versus control, law versus chaos, resonate more now than ever. And Hamill's performance, once criticized, is now celebrated for its boldness, showing his range far beyond Star Wars. What critics dismissed as a flop has aged into a fascinating curiosity, a film that dared to dream differently and paid the price for its ambition. It leaves us with a reminder. Sometimes the most daring journeys are the ones we almost forgot to take. Dark City, 1988. Before Alex Proyas's Dark City in the late 90s, there was a little-seen Australian film also called Dark City, 1988. Critics brushed it aside at the time, calling it uneven, too grim, and too strange for mainstream audiences. With its noir aesthetic and apocalyptic futurism, it was too odd to compete with the neon optimism of other 80s blockbusters. Directed by Alex Proyas in his early career, Before the Crow, this precursor concept was a short-form experiment in blending expressionist shadows with science fiction paranoia. It never reached wide theatrical audiences, yet its DNA helped shape the more polished 1998 feature. In the late 1980s, however, critics dismissed it as confusing, derivative of Blade Runner, and unworthy of serious discussion. But here's the twist. In hindsight, that early Dark City feels like a glimpse of things to come. It played with identity, memory manipulation, and an oppressive cityscape decades before Hollywood embraced such themes. At a time when critics demanded clean narratives and crowd-pleasing finales, Dark City offered something far moodier, a portrait of humans as rats in a cosmic maze. Its limited release and weak reception doomed it in its own decade, but modern reassessment has been kinder. Film historians now see it as a bridge between Australia's scrappy genre experiments and the visionary international work Proyas would later deliver. Fans who rediscovered the short praised its atmosphere, tone, and bravery. Dismissed as a failure, the early Dark City stands today as a ghost of unrealized genius, proof that even flawed experiments can plant seeds for the future of sci-fi. Dune, 1984. When David Lynch's Dune premiered, it was savaged by critics. Reviews called it incomprehensible, bloated, and dull. The New York Times declared it an unholy mess. Audiences expecting the next Star Wars were bewildered. Box office receipts were poor, and Lynch himself disowned the film after studio meddling left his vision mutilated. But decades later, reassessment paints a different picture. Behind the chaos, Lynch created one of the most visually daring sci-fi epics of the decade. The sets were monumental, the costumes lavish, the atmosphere steeped in surrealism. Where critics saw incoherence, modern viewers see texture. A dreamlike adaptation of Frank Herbert's complex novel, filled with grotesque villains, hallucinatory visions, and haunting performances from Kyle MacLachlan, Francesca Annis, and a terrifyingly unhinged Kenneth McMillan. Behind the scenes, the production was cursed. Universal demanded a 2-hour runtime, forcing Lynch to butcher his intended cut. Studio executives interfered constantly, trimming subplots and flattening nuance. The marketing sold it as a popcorn adventure, a disastrous mismatch for audiences confronted with Lynch's nightmarish imagery. Yet in hindsight, Dune feels ahead of its time. Its treatment of prophecy, destiny, and ecology now resonates with startling force. Fans who grew up watching it on VHS began defending its ambition, arguing that its imperfections made it more mythic. Even Denis Villeneuve, director of the 2021 Dune, has praised Lynch's flawed but visionary work. What critics once called a disaster has aged into a cult masterpiece. Today, it stands as proof that failure in its time does not erase greatness in the long arc of history. Blade Runner, 1982. Perhaps the greatest reversal of fortune in cinema history, Blade Runner was met with indifference and scorn in 1982. Critics called it slow, confusing, and style over substance. Roger Ebert dismissed it as a failure of imagination. Audiences flocked to E.T. instead, leaving Ridley Scott's neon noir stranded at the box office. Behind the scenes, it was a nightmare. Harrison Ford clashed with Scott. The studio demanded a happy ending and a clunky voiceover, diluting Scott's bleak vision. The first release was an awkward hybrid, too strange for mainstream crowds, too compromised for purists. For years it was remembered as a flop, but like its replicants, Blade Runner refused to die. The home video market gave it a second life. As audiences watched again, they noticed details critics had missed. The rain-drenched streets, the haunted monologues, the aching beauty of Vangelis's score. When Scott's director's cut appeared in 1992, the film was reborn. Without the studio-mandated changes, its brilliance was undeniable. Today, Blade Runner is celebrated as one of the most influential films ever made. Its cyberpunk aesthetic defined the future in cinema, inspiring everything from The Matrix to video games like Cyberpunk 2077. Its themes, identity, mortality, and what it means to be human, resonate more strongly now than ever. What critics called a failure in 1982 has aged into a titan, proving that some films are not meant for their time, they're meant for the future. The 80s gave us more than blockbusters. It gave us visions too strange, too daring, too misunderstood to survive in their moment. Yet time has vindicated them. Which of these forgotten sci-fi gems spoke to you? Comment your favorite, like, and subscribe, because the future always deserves a second chance.